Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 4 of our Creating the New Normal webinar series. My name is Maggie Caesar. I'm the Senior Customer Marketing Manager for eBuilder. This session is called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the Unexpected Consequences of an Interruption. So if you've attended the last several webinars, you'll notice we've had a variety of owner and contractor organizations who have joined us. This week, we're going to get the perspective on the state of the industry from a few of the industry's top program managers. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Connery and Matt Sprague from our product marketing department.
Thank you very much, Maggie. My name is Matt Sprague, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Trimble. My counterpart, Dan Connery, is having technical difficulties. So we're getting a little curveball to begin with. So right now, I'll try to play both roles of host and co-host. So if Dan's unable to come on, I'm going to be monitoring the questions that are being brought in by the attendees. So if you see me looking to my right, I'm not ignoring the conversation. I'm just looking at the fantastic questions that are being sent in from our attendees. As Maggie did a fantastic job setting up exactly what today's webinar is about, and I'm just going to quickly introduce our panelists. I'm looking at my screen. I don't know if it's the same as everybody that's out there, but I'm going to go clockwise, starting with Michael Krabacher from CDM Smith. Next would be Matt DeMarco from HDR. And last but certainly not least, we have Julia Bolte from AECOM. So we were very purposeful in deciding to bring in 3 panelists from our partner organizations, in that we're looking at a one-to-many type play, where in the past we had 2 representatives from owner organizations and 1 from a general contractor, where each one of these have interactions and are dealing with multiple owners across multiple geographies. So we thought they could bring a larger perspective as to things that were going on. So we're actually taking a bit of a greatest hits approach from the first 3 webinars and the most engaging questions and conversations, and posing it to them to be able to provide possibly a larger perspective or a different perspective. So normally at this time, I would hand it over to Dan Connery, who would say he would be able to monitor the questions. If Dan is able to interface, you'll see him pop in and pop out at times in order to be able to interject questions that are coming from the attendees. So please make sure that you take full advantage of the question panel in your GoToWebinar panel and send those questions in, because we'd love to be able to interject those as we roll through. All right.
I'll help out too, Matt. If Dan's out, I'll help out too. I'll be monitoring the panel throughout.
It's a team.
We're all in this together, working from home, dealing with technology.
Awesome. So with that, we started pretty much every single one of these webinars off with a similar question, and we're not going to change at all, just to kind of get the ball rolling, so to speak. So really, it's a level set type of question in terms of like what's the current state of the projects that you're involved with that are out there. You know, what are you seeing in terms of with the active projects versus the ones that maybe have been shut down? Are there ones that are considered essential versus non-essential? Are things different depending on the geography? So it's kind of a very kind of large arching question to begin with. We'll go ladies first to begin with. Julia, would you like to add any comments to that?
Sure. So I'm down in the South Florida region. I'm in Miami specifically, but I work with a lot of programs between the East Coast and more or less to our Midwest region. So it really varies by region. Right now, I have some very, very active projects here in Miami that are actually specific to implementation of eBuilder or PMISs. So that type of work has picked up significantly as a result of this. We have a few of those types of projects around the country. So those actually, if anything, have been expedited due to the current situation. As far as some of our big capital programs that are kicking off, there are a few enabling things that are still ongoing. There's a lot of design work, so pre-design, design phases. If we're able to, if we have some sort of a software set up, most of those have been continuing without a hitch. Others that did not want to proceed with implementing some way to continue the work via that format, some sort of electronic format, those are the ones that we're noticing are experiencing a slowdown. And as far as construction, ones that are in construction phase, it really depends on the type of construction it is. We have some folks in our education sector that have paused on a lot of their projects. We have folks in our healthcare sectors that have redeployed some of their plans to do other plans. And then our government sectors, we've noticed it really, again, depends. If it's critical infrastructure, those continue. Others that maybe were kind of what we would generally consider like to haves or projects, you know, around that were not necessarily required, but were important to the community. Some of those have been put on pause for now to only focus on things that are critical.
Great, thank you. Matt, what about you?
Yeah, Matt DeMarco, HDR, sitting in Pittsburgh. You know, the three firms here, AECOM, CDM Smith, and HDR, we're what you call the larger AE firms. I know HDR is 10,000, AECOM's 80, 90, 100,000 staff. CDM Smith, I think, has a large number of staff. So we're seeing some of our business sectors have rise. We're seeing some have fall. But overall, I think the AE industry is still pretty strong. A lot of the work that we do is considered crucial by government. So a lot of the work that's in the pipeline as far as money that's being earmarked for funding and for projects that are still in the pipeline, we're not really told to pause. We're told to keep going. I have one current assignment that I can talk about that's going on up in Canada that the government has deemed it essential services, and we're able to really move forward. But what's difficult about this is that during our pre-design that Julia mentioned, we have our geotech and we have our field surveyors that aren't able to perform the work because the local government and the local police are saying, show us your documentation, your proof that you're actually essential services for you to do your work. So it's something that as we draft our PMPs in the industry, we don't really have a COVID-19 section that we've had in our PMPs. So for me and the teams that I'm managing, we're adapting our PMPs to talk about how do we get letters of intent from owners to make sure that our field services have documentation that keeps them out of jail. How do we work with sub-consultants that are saying, hey, you know, doing this work is hazardous to my health and my you know, my record for crime, right? How do we go about doing this? So there's been a lot of challenges that I don't think anyone anticipated this COVID thing was going to put on projects. But the point being is that it's been really a good opportunity, though, for us to, what I would say they're really doing is how are we able to leverage technology to stay efficient? Because one thing that's I would say is complementary is that the industry is still successfully doing work. Instead of 500 people sitting in a room, we have 500 people across multiple time zones. And for the most part, we're not really seeing design production slow down. Longer hours, more difficult, yes, but still hitting our milestones. So not that COVID's exciting, but it's been exciting to see how dedicated professionals are still working on getting the job done.
Thanks. Mike, before we jump up to you, everybody, this is Dan Connery. After his laptop reboot, he has made it back, so he'll be popping in and popping out. You can say hi.
Hey, everyone.
And now he'll pop away, and I don't have to monitor the questions anymore. That'll be Dan's job. So, all right, we are back to fully operational. Michael, I'll punt that one over to you.
Sure. So Mike Krabacher, I'm in Cincinnati, based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm the program controls lead for CDM Smith. We do, we equip our program management, large CM teams with tools and systems across the US, and we also have some programs international that we support as well. I would say, as a firm for CDM Smith, in terms of kind of recent events, I think we were pretty well prepared in terms of our design teams, our systems that we've invested pretty heavily in the past couple of years, that we've, it's been challenging, but yet I think we've seen some of the rewards of our investments in some of the tools and systems we've put in place recently. As far as client facing, we did kind of reached out to a lot of our CM teams and clients a few weeks back, and I don't recall exact numbers, but it was something on the order of like 90% of the construction projects. I mean, we're in the water, wastewater, transportation industry or market, so a lot of that's considered essential. 90% of those projects were continuing on either with regular schedule or with some type of reduced staff. Some of them had delays, around a month or so, but the general message was that work was continuing on those types of projects. Just recently this week, one of our clients put one of their major wastewater projects out to bid. So that was a good sign that things are staying, moving forward with a lot of the clients that we're working with.
Were there any adaptations to the bidding process that needed to be created due to the lack of, I don't know if any of it was a paper-based system or anything like that?
No, I think I think their bidding process is still going to be the same. I know there was some discussion prior to that project going out to bid about the contractors guaranteeing pricing, that was going to have to be something to be looked at, and then something to kind of mitigate concerns about supply chain and them getting, being able to guarantee that equipment's going to be on site in certain timeframes. So I don't know for certain what specific changes were made to that bidding process, but I think to me it was the bigger impact was, or the bigger, I guess, sign was that these projects are critical, important to get done for municipal clients, and they're gonna keep going forward, with the bidding of those projects.
Matt.
One of my clients. Oh, go ahead.
Ladies first.
No, I was just going to mention, to actually answer your question, one of our clients this week, one of my clients is the city of Miami. And they were in the process of actually implementing eBuilder there for them, but they also have BidSync, and they had to expedite the use of it because the mayor decided that, and the commission decided that they were no longer going to accept paper. They've been one of the cities that's very proactive, trying to limit social contact, trying to limit touching of anything. So they said, listen, you need to expedite it. And so their procurement department actually announced this week that beginning in May, all the procurements will be done electronically. So they're one of the cities, I think, that, and we see it with a few of our clients as well, that we're already thinking about it. It was already planned, but they're kind of expediting some of those plans to really take that next step and to say, let's just do it now. No better time than the present. We need it right now. Let's do it. So I've seen a lot of effort by a lot of municipalities who, we're going to do it. A lot of them were going to do it anyway. Even some that were kind of on the fence are really seeing, you know what, we really need to keep going. We need to keep things moving. We can't just, stop this, especially for municipalities, like with water, like with some of our other civil groups. They have to do it. It has to get done. We need to RFP stuff. We need to still go and do RFQs and ITVs and all that. And I see them really kind of stepping up and figuring out, okay, how we're going to do this. The first phase of this, I feel like a lot of them had to figure out, like you said, getting computers, just the logistics of everyone needs a computer now at home because they're so used to being in government, they're so used to being at home, or rather in the office. And so to bring that then and be able to do things remote, I've seen a lot of people really step up to the challenge. And things that they were thinking about doing, they're like, let's just do it. And they've gone ahead. So it's going to change how we do things and how we respond as an industry to that. And I think that's great. I've always felt that clients are really the ones who drive our industry. And I think them stepping up in this challenge, to the challenge, is huge. And I think that'll be a huge impact on, and we'll feel it from the design teams, from our contractors as PMs. We'll feel it all the way across the industry.
Yeah, Julia, I'll pick up on that. That's one thing that took us by surprise with the clients that we are dealing with, is that a lot of the government clients, they have desktops and landlines. And now when everybody goes home, they don't have laptops to issue with them. And then international calls, what we're trying to do with international is that they can't call the US. So even if they were using their personal cell phone, they're not allowed to call the US. So just how we do international business from people that are used to having a PC and a landline, that's been challenging. And owners have been, owners aren't the easiest people to buy IT equipment from, but they're doing that. The one point I want to go back to what Michael was saying about cost of equipment, we have seen some capital costs be available and bring the price down. So there are more cranes sitting out there. So when there's more cranes sitting out there, the alternative design community and the alternative to build, when they're factoring in costs in their job, there's a lot of cranes sitting out there and there's a lot of tunnel boring machines. And I know that's a very odd piece of capital equipment, but there's actually a lot of good used TBMs that are out there. So what we're hoping to see is some of these costs come down for the owners about these large multi-billion-dollar capital programs, because the risk for the contractors is getting their hands on that really large capital equipment. So some of that equipment is becoming much more available.
You know, Julia, you mentioned about the bidding and it being kind of a, the recent events driving more towards electronic bidding or changing the way they do things. One observation I've had is, we have clients who are using systems to, let's say, process invoices or pay apps through a program or construction management team, and for one reason or another, they kind of stop short at transferring it over for payment. There's this requirement of there has to be a hard copy, and I think my expectation was that those clients would be open to talking about, hey, let's see if we can eliminate this step and make this seamless and just have it all electronic. But in a couple of the instances I've found is that they almost have bigger fish to fry right now. Like, to talk about eliminating that, it's almost what I've seen is there's a stopgap that's put in to say, we're okay with this signed PDF copy or with an email approval, and we're attaching that as documentation. But I don't see, that they want to take the time right now to address that. So I think it's coming. I think it will eventually, when things calm down a little bit, there'll be let's go back and get that taken care of, and let's go ahead and eliminate this, make it a full electronic process. But I don't think, at least with the clients I've been working with, don't see like, well, now's not the right time to be, concerned with that. We've got some, we've got people working at home that don't have laptops, for example. So.
Yeah, no, we've seen the same. One of my clients they hadn't started the process yet of getting their system set up. They're just starting their capital program. They're going to be deploying a large capital plan. So we had started to develop, the SOPs and put together a PMP for them and everything. And so you're right. Like, they were one that said, listen, we can't invest in stuff like that. We just have to, fill in the gaps where we can right now, and just, we have to focus on deploying software. They're in the higher ed, so they were like, we need to deploy software just to get our students working. So, the rest we'll figure out. So we have some temporary ones that we put in place for them. I think where we're seeing that it was expedited is, again, those who kind of already knew we want to get there. So let's just do it. Like, they already had those stuff in the works, because you're right. And with regard to actual procurement of things like that right now, we've seen a lot of people holding up on that because they're doing emergency procurement right now. Right. So it's not like they're trying to go out and start all of that. They're really focused on things that are emergencies. I think, though, like you said, it is going to start happening where people are like, hey, we need to get some things moving, and we're still seeing this social distancing. We still have all of these restrictions. We still have a lot of things, and we still need to get the stuff done. Maybe we need a longer term solution for the future.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a different, where some clients, they're wanting to accelerate how they use scheduling. Clients have been on the fence. You know, we've always scheduled just using an Excel file, right? And we can do all of our capital planning that way. And it's kind of the opposite. It says, okay, we need a lot more schedule visibility. I need to know what the critical path, and you know, if this delay happens in this building or this structure, how does this affect my overall portfolio? So there has been an influx of owners that have typically not really embraced CPM scheduling or any type of linear scheduling or visual scheduling, saying, okay, we need help. We need help. So I'm seeing a little bit of the opposite. I'm seeing they're wanting to really get a handle on their scheduling better.
Yeah, I think we've seen that with regard to capital plans, that folks are really wanting to reevaluate them very quickly, which is why, I mean, we've seen more requests for that type of service. I don't know that they've wanted to necessarily procure those things for themselves. I think long term they'll see the value in it, and you'll see, you know, folks like Michael's group or my group who will be helping them out with things like that to help them build those tools. But yeah, you're right. Right now we're getting a lot of requests for those services, even from our programs that are already deployed, to reassess, you know, take a look. Let's see, what do we really have to do right now, and what's on pause? How does this impact me? What does it look like for next year then for me? Because that's information that they have to then bring to the larger group to evaluate what comes next.
Cool. I let everybody know. I told this group of panelists, I go, my ideal webinar is that I ask one question and they just have a conversation. And for a minute there, I thought I was about to get it. So
I was like, how are we doing?
Fantastic. So Julia, you had just mentioned something there. You had kind of hit two buzzwords to the next question I was going to kind of bring up. One, social distancing, and the impact. So you know, what are some of the top impacts that you guys have seen or have heard of? So now we're transitioning the conversation to a little bit more of like what's happening in the field to those projects that haven't been shut down. Or if, you know, I think, Matt, I think the state of Pennsylvania starts back up today or tomorrow. I don't know if I'm accurate.
Yeah.
You know, what are some of those impacts that social distancing are going to create? And I'll, you know, good, bad, or ugly. We'll tie in the webinar theme there. So we'll start. Matt, I pinged you on Pennsylvania there, so we'll go ahead.
Okay, so actually, a lot of the work I do is not in Pennsylvania. So I would say the national perspective that we're seeing is that the projects that are considered critical and crucial, the field servers are still going on, but the contractors are taking extra onus to figure out a way to have bathroom facilities, to be able to have operations that are different segments of the job to try to promote. But the crews themselves, we're seeing that, you know, you still need a 4-person crew to install something. And they are just wearing masks and gloves and just trying to do the best they can because they're deemed essential. So one thing that I can say is there was a 7,000 person operation in Pennsylvania that got shut down. And trying to bring 7,000 people back to work, it's going to be tough. Like, I really don't know how they're going to bring 7,000 people back onto a construction site to keep going. And they don't have it figured out. So they're not starting back up. So the small projects, we're seeing progress, but the mega projects, I don't know. I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't think they do either because they're not planning on starting back up.
You know, I would say that it's a, oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, Mike, go ahead.
I don't have a lot of kind of insight into the on-site construction impacts. A couple of things that I've heard is, you know, what is the best practice for these contractor health and safety plans? You know, what should be in them, and I think there's some demand for knowing or learning from others as to what is the best approach. I think there's a lot of people asking that same question. But just from a logistics, Matt, that you had mentioned, one thing is parking, right? Like if everyone used to come together to the site in one vehicle, and now you've got everyone has to, or is choosing to come by themselves. I mean, that's a parking issue. So just a couple little things there that I thought I'd pass along.
Yeah, I think for us in the field, so one of the large projects that we have down here is a healthcare project. We're building a hospital, and that has not stopped. I think, I've spoken with our project executive out there a few times about it, and he and I both had been on the contractor side for a long time, so we take that very seriously. So we talked through the logistics of keeping that open, because we also have a few projects for that particular client that are in active hospitals as well. They're a multi-campus facility, so it was actually easier to do some of the work outside of the hospitals. So we have the freestanding hospital. That one it's a larger campus itself, so we were able to implement kind of phased work. So instead of having everybody all in a room, he also implemented out there phased lunches. So not everybody's having lunch all at the same time, where usually you'd see like the job site goes completely empty as soon as the lunch truck comes. Actually working with the lunch truck to say like, hey, we need you to stay, or come at different times or stagger that. So like just staggering the times that everyone would kind of be all in one place at the same time. One of the struggles we had was just getting PPE for a bit there, because again, here in Florida, construction was still deemed a critical business, but at the same time, it was just hard for anyone to get masks. Like the guys who normally would just go, pick them up at the supply house or go pick them up at Home Depot, they were not available. And just from an OSHA standpoint, we have to maintain those safety standards for them. So that was actually really tough for a few weeks there, and still continues to be, just to make sure that those folks still have access to just their normal PPE was important. Things like drinking water, making sure that they had, because down here it's Florida. I mean, it's, we've had 95-degree weather. We worry about heat stroke. So one of the things that a lot of folks sent out nationally was don't have communal water. And we were like, whoa, we need water. That's something important. How do we do that? So we've had to get very creative to answer those types of questions. It's been harder in our active healthcare environment. When we have to do renovations and things of that nature, where our contractors, it's already a hard type of construction to do, to keep those spaces clean. Those spaces are generally not infection control clean. I used to work for a hospital as a director of facility planning, and you go through all of those infection control measure trainings and all of that up and above OSHA. It's they have OSHA for healthcare. It's totally different PPE, totally different protocols, and to have to train some of the staff to understand those types of protocols in that environment, it's hard with all of that pressure. So, we've even seen the stress on our contractors. We've seen letters come out nationally from contractors and subcontractors, making sure that we're trying to keep in mind that, yes, they are critical, but we also have to take care of them. And we have to be thinking about the fact that even the basic OSHA standards are that much more important. And then on top of that, now the infection control component.
I want to offer one empathetic point to our contracting community. Friends with a few contractor owners, and this is not meant to be a legal statement, but when you lay off your workforce and you invite them back, if they contract COVID-19, now it's a workers' comp claim, and now you have to pay your workers' comp, and your insurance premiums go up. So what do? Do you take the work back and try to make sure you're back to work, or do you run the risk of the workers' comp claims? Because and I have a lot of empathy for owners in this position about this, right? And if you do have folks that end up getting sick, now you're making your potential premiums on your on your workers' comp goes up and you can't cover that bill. So I have a lot of sympathy for owners that have to make these decisions about this. We're kind of in untested times here in our contracting methods and how to deal with this.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, I got three things that'll segue us into our next one. Well, two of them don't segue. Two of them are kind of cross promotional. So one to go with what you just mentioned, Matt, about the new risks that are going to be involved upon restarting. So all of you attendees, we did not pay him to say this and cross promote next week's webinar. But next week's webinar is going to be starting. It's actually going to be a two-week webinar kind of series, if you will, a series within a series. We're going to talk about, what's going to happen. What's the restart's going to be like. So you're 100% correct that there's things just like what you just mentioned, but there's a lot more to it, and we're going to dive into that a bit more. To go back to Michael, what you had mentioned in terms of that you're not necessarily a contractor, so you're not out in the field that much. For those attendees that are interested a bit more, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is kind of like a greatest hits questions. That question came from last week, week 3's webinar, of which case we had a contractor from Yates Construction that really dove into that.
Oh,
so feel, to jump into that webinar and be able to listen to what they said there as well. Now I'll segue into the next question. And this question actually came from one of our attendees. After registrations started on Monday, we sent out a survey asking, it's like, hey, here are all the questions we're anticipating and asking. What's most important to you? And do you have another question that you'd like to have answered? And this was sent in by one of our attendees, and it was still along the lines of social distancing, but kind of now tying back into the idea of schedules. Have you seen the the impacts of social distancing, or are you going to expect the impacts of social distancing to affect the project schedules, causing delays or anything along those lines? Who wants it?
I can take that one first. So actually, we're already feeling that. Like I said, we're already implementing a lot of that because we had to keep construction going on some of these projects. So we've, even as of this morning, I mean, we do a lot of like Lean Six Sigma and pull planning, things like that. So we're actually already actively looking at our construction projects. Even I was on 2 calls this morning, and we're doing certain site logistics reviews, things like that, because like you were mentioning earlier about parking and having to make sure that we have enough parking spaces, because that's always an issue. How do we park them if there are certain limitations, or how do we, like I said, phase things so that people aren't in the same room, because now we're adding this other layer to scheduling. But really, we're just taking that as just, I mean, construction is already super complicated, generally speaking. We all do it every day, but it's some of your most complex project management that you can do. Having done it in multiple industries, construction is still one of the most difficult logistically, and I feel like it's just one more thing that we're just kind of figuring into getting it done, but the deadline never finishes, it never moves. So just figuring it out.
I'll pick up where Julie is. So I'm sure there's some projects at HDR this might not apply to, but I would say in general, our schedules haven't slipped. The owner's requirements haven't slipped. They don't want to push RFPs. They don't want to push our design submissions. They don't want to push our stuff. Now, as much as they don't want to push, there are external forces that are causing pushes. I mentioned earlier about geotech field crews and survey field crews and LiDAR and a variety of other things that they are seeing delays, which ultimately are making us to push our schedules, but they're not owner, let's go ahead and just push the schedule 6 months for the sake of pushing it. There is no intention to push, right? Julia and Michael mentioned all of our projects seem to be earmarked with secured monies, and they don't want to push those monies into future years because it's just the cost of capital. We have the money earmarked now. Let's spend it now. So the technology, the ability to us to all have shared single source of truth is good. I'll make one last I'll say it's marketing for myself. I've revamped our project charters to really focus on, we need to send links, not attachments. So we need to make sure that our information technology systems is a single source of truth for documents and information. And we all need to send links to that information and minimize attachments. It's just, there's just too much going on to deal with attachments. Give me the link, give me the source.
You know, one thing I'll say about that with the use of the systems, and we've seen this, I think, over the past month or so, but the benefits you get from a PMIS or some type of cloud-based system, it's great. You're capitalizing on that investment right now and during this kind of period of time. But I think it also increases the risk and making sure that system's going to perform when you need it to. You know, a lot more people relying on it. We've seen longer work days, and Matt, maybe that gets back to your productivity question. You know, maybe it's a longer work day because they're not as productive, and so we see, contractors and REs in the systems later during the day. But I guess my point is, being so reliant on these systems, they've got to work. And, any little hiccup, you've got a lot more people relying on it even more now than maybe they did in the past, where they say, well, I can just go do this workaround. Well, there isn't a plan B right now. You're relying on this system. So, we've seen a couple of instances over the past few weeks where things have kind of hiccups in systems that have, the reaction amongst the users is way more rapid and way more, shall we say, urgent than maybe in the past. So that's something that we've seen is, that you're really relying on these systems and they got to work.
So sorry, I was just going to say, I'll echo Michael, the longer workday. It seems I travel constantly, and I was traveling to some sites, right? And I could almost get more work done in 3.5 days traveling in the airport than I can sitting in the basement 14 hours a day, 5 days a week. Yeah. And it's just amazing how many more hours it takes to be able to have some conversations, because you just can't have it in person. So we're not missing our deadlines, but the workday is longer and longer. I will definitely echo that, Michael.
Yeah. And I think even on that same point, one of the things we're noticing, because we've talked a lot about the construction side, but for us, and for you guys as well, design is still a really big part of our business. And our designers, I think, have felt that as well. It's been a big shift for them, especially, I know a lot of our design groups are very collaborative folks, and they are used to doing things electronic to a degree, but they're also used to that physical, getting together to sit and talk about a design and see it together. And so we've had the tools available, so some folks have adopted it. But we've also seen a much larger adoption, like you said, because they don't have other options. We can't just get together by a desk and take a look at the plan or pull it up on the big screen in the conference room and all get around it. So we've been seeing a very heavy utilization of a lot of our servers that house our BIM models, that house our P6. A lot of folks getting into that server to really get together and collaboratively use Teams to go and look at the schedule all together. And we've been seeing people try and shift to that. But again, like you said, sometimes there is that value of getting together and just being right there. And sometimes that happens just a little faster because of the technology glitches, or like what we had earlier where, one person couldn't join or they came later. And so it's pros and cons to both. But we're seeing that as well on the design team, not just on the construction side.
So we've had Dan's first pop in. We have a question from the audience.
2 questions, actually. So the first one is maybe start with you, Matt, and elaborate more on your comment about attachments versus links.
Sure. So one of the things that we're really trying to make sure we do with our systems, eBuilder, Teams, QuickBase, we can throw out any system you want, right? Is that the main core tenets is that we want the information to reside in those systems. So as we try to reduce email traffic, because we all know that in email, you're only as good as the last email chains break, right? Especially as you try to live in communication. So what we're really trying to focus to do is that if we need to make a comment, we're making comments in the system. If there is a marked up drawing or a drawing we want to point people to, we point to the system where it's housed, right? So email for us is really just meant to set the stage for when are we going to go look at this together? How can you take a message individually and make sure that people are going back to the source? So it's a cliche, but we're really trying to make sure the single source of truth. The one project I'm on, there's 500 people, right? All sitting at home. How do you have a 500 person email conversation? You can't, right? So it's got to be back to the main source for that truth. So in an email, don't have the attachment, have the URL.
Julia or Michael, anything you want to add?
No, well, I mean, that's what we drive a lot of our PMPs, a lot of our things, whenever we refer to them as living documents, like you said, like they're being updated regularly. Right now, we have a lot of those with regard to safety, with regard to protocols, with regard to all of those things. And all of them, we are doing the same to encourage that use of links to take you always to the latest and greatest version. Don't just download it, save it on your desktop, and then use that one. Go ahead and use that link because it's probably getting updated almost every day with the way that information passes right this moment. The other thing is file sizes are just so large. Like we're embedding so much information in them. You know, we've had situations where people try and email something and then only half the people get it because it gets caught in somebody's, email chain somewhere. So I know whenever we're training staff or training clients or contractors, we always try and do what Matt was saying, really focus on that link. Sending a link, don't send me the whole file, let them download it if they need to, but then upload it back to the same thing to version control it. It's from a quality control standpoint of a document, that's the best way to keep the integrity of it.
So the couple questions that a little bit similarity. One of them is about any thoughts or any feedback you've gotten from your clients about the cost impacts of now having to provide equipment for people working out of the house. So laptops, internet access, maybe, for example, for us at Trimble, it was a lot of people are used to multiple monitors in the office, and now they're asking for multiple monitors at home. So the first question is anything you've heard from the impact of the overhead on companies and outfitting employees for work from home. And then an ancillary question to that is about what do you think is going to happen when people return to the office from a productivity perspective? So Michael, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't have any comments on the equipment question other than just within CDM Smith internally. We set up a system that you could check your equipment out from the office so they could track, where it all went. So I think that was really, it's not really from a cost perspective, it's maybe equipment tracking, making sure you know where it is. So to your later question about when everybody comes back, you want to make sure everybody's got all the equipment that they need. I guess one thing I would say in terms of planning when everyone comes back is we've seen a couple of clients sort of engage in maybe more than they would have in like a risk management discussion, like, well, what are we going to do in the future? What are the opportunities? What are the risks that we're going to be encountering? So, because I think everybody knows eventually this is going to end. It's going to come. We're going to come back into some type of new situation. What does that look like, and how can we prepare for it? I don't think anybody that's on this call or been on any of these calls knows the answer to that, but I think that risk management framework as a way to engage with your clients and your teams has proven pretty effective, because nobody has, here's the new policy. It's more of a what does everybody think about this risk and what could we do to mitigate it? And then you can have to change it going forward, but at least you can have the discussion in a kind of a risk-based discussion as opposed to anything really finite.
Got it. And one also just layer in a little bit from some of our prior discussions is that one of the questions we often ask is, what do you want to see stay the same? So everybody talks about all the negative outcomes of what we're dealing with, but there are some positives. And one of the things that was discussed, and we're seeing that even inside of Trimble, is that there's a realization that people actually can be productive at home. Matt, you're talking about not as productive, but that certain roles and responsibilities can be, in fact, I'd argue on our side of the house, more productive at home than they are in the office. And so answering a little bit of the questions of the impact is organizations should be thinking about, do you actually need the number of offices and spaces after this is over that you did going into it? So there are potential cost savings. So I just wanted to mention that from some of our prior conference meetings.
Yeah, I think to add to that, oh, sorry, did you have another one?
Please go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, that on that same vein, one of the things that we actually were about to move one of our offices from one location to another, from a place where actually physically the spaces were like larger cubicles, little more, I mean, it's an open concept, but still larger cubicles, more space in between, to, you know, what you're seeing more standard in a lot of design and construction, where we have the very close quarters, everyone collaborating and being all in the same space. So I think actually that's going to be one of the things that I know a lot of folks have moved towards in the last 10, 15 years. So you see a lot of the design spaces being designed that way. That's actually one of the things that is, I think, going to start to drive a little bit of that need to have to keep some folks from home and not necessarily have a space be, you know, which as a Lean Six Sigma person, like to say that a space is not going to be fully utilized is a little difficult, but the lower utilization is actually going to be required in order to maintain some of these social distancing things. So, you know, it is something that I hope does remain, that people do understand that you can be productive. I personally have worked from home over the last year because of my having to go to different client sites and everything. I work remote. And I have noticed some folks wonder about that. But again, if you produce, if you know how to produce, if you know how to manage teams, it's different to manage a team remotely. So I think those are some of the things that hopefully people are doing differently right now and learning, and that we continue to see going forward, is that shift in management style to be able to accommodate that, because, you know, these things happen, and we need to be able to accommodate based on that.
All right, so I think the last question I'll ask, because I know we got to start to land this plane, is around a little bit more advice, if you have any to give, as far as what owners can do to help alleviate the pressure that the supply chain is going to feel. You know, we have already talked about social distancing a little bit. Matt, you mentioned the owners aren't out of the gate coming and saying, hey, I'll just give you some more time. However, there has been a substantial shock into the supply chain. You mentioned about how do you mobilize a 7,000 person project? Somebody's going to have to answer that question. If there's any advice that any of you can give to owners, just things they should be thinking about to help ease that shock into the chain.
Well, there's two types of owners, right? There's public owners and private owners, right? And public owners have a certain guidelines through public policy, through their laws, through their local ordinances, that unless laws change, there's not much they can do, right? They're bound by the governing of that, and they're bound by just good, sound spending of public funds. So that's a tough one. The only thing I probably could think of that owners are going to have to consider is, I think Julia's point is, owners were accustomed to seeing design and consultant teams, and they were accustomed to having in-person meetings, and there were costs associated to travel, right? If we can show that we can be as productive with remote meetings with limited staff traveling, I think some of the expectations about, okay, do we really need to have a 30-person in-person meeting for a one-day workshop? If that changes, then costs go down. We're not spending as much in expenses, and maybe other funds that they normally spend on us can go other places. Dan, private owners are a little bit different animal because private owners are about the profit bottom line, right? So they have stockholders, shareholders, and they're really driven more by a different creed. And if they think that they can weather the storm with their profit and not start a project up, and they can start it back up, they have a completely different way they think about how they spend their money and their risk profile. So that's a tough question because you really got to qualify which owner you're talking about.
Okay. Julia, anything you want to add?
I think for me, the biggest thing that I would tell our owners right now, it's the same thing when we work with them that I always talk about. What are the things that are the most important to you? And given the constraints that we're dealing with, you really have to look critically at why you're doing things the way that you do them today. Is it just because that's the way we've always done them? Is it because it's required, or is it because I just want to, just because I'm used to it? This is really that time to kind of ask, and I think most of us can ask ourselves that same question, but this is really one of those moments where life kind of just puts it in your face. And I would encourage everyone to just take that time. If you're a manager of a department, if you're a project manager, if you're a director, or if you're in any sort of, even if it's from the ground up, if you're just a worker, think about why it is that you guys have been doing things a certain way, how it's changed recently, and what parts of that would you keep and why? And are there any things that are actually physically restraining you from doing that, laws, things like that? Even something as simple as signatures, this is applicable to why do we sign this thing? Do we physically have to? Like, is it required because there's a law that says it has to be signed? Does it have to be notarized? Or is it just because we're used to it? Simple things like that. Really ask yourselves in this time, what do we want to take forward with us? And where is there opportunity where we could adopt better ways to do it?
Yeah, it was interesting. And then Michael, I'll let you conclude. But again, the contractor we had on in week 1 and 3 mentioned that they started to really question the inspections that are being done. And they said, is this something we're actually legally required or contractually required to do? And there were several that people were like, I don't know, we've always done those inspections. So Michael, go ahead. You get the last word.
I was just going to say one thing about the, supply chain, or if material deliveries are going to be interrupted. I mean, one option that we've seen owners use, maybe is not as much recently, but is just to pre-purchase equipment. If you feel like if the owner can take on that risk for the contractor and supply that, if they've got a lead time where they can start on that now and they need it in the future, and that might be a way to get a jump on that, or to take that risk from the contractor if they feel like they can manage it better.
Excellent. So Matt, that's we have more questions, but we have no more time.
Yep,
so we'll follow up on the question.
So I'm going to kind of preempt right now any of the attendees. We have a couple announcements that we want to make sure that we get through. First, I know that we're going to, within the chat area, put a link for registration for next week's webinar, which Dan is about to highlight and chat about. So please don't go anywhere. It's not, we are actually very excited about the next 2 weeks webinars. Dan will give you a little bit of highlight reel stuff right now.
So Maggie, if you could go ahead and share the screen. And so Matt had alluded to this, but we're doing a 2-part series to wrap up this 6-week series, and it's because we got some great feedback from attendees over the last 4 weeks, or 3 weeks leading into this, that they want to get a little bit more specific and understand what's going to happen when we restart our projects. Matt mentioned a perfect tee up for this. How are you going to mobilize 7,000 people? What is the impact of budgets and schedules? So we have a group of panelists who are industry experts that are going to come and speak. I'll talk about that on the next slide. And then we're going to follow that up with specifically having panelists that are going to talk about what are some of the changes to contracting language that needs to be thought of moving forward. What risks are you taking on? So I learned something today, so thank you, Matt, about this workman's compensation. So we're going to share other tips and tricks like that, and then what's going on with productivity. So we know there's going to be an impact due to social distancing, but is there, for example, opportunities to deploy technology? So next week, the overarching theme is what happens next. So what's next? And part one is about the restarts, impact of budgets and schedules. So we have Donna from Dodge Data and Analytics. They did a huge industry survey, and they're going to bring those results and present them out to the attendees. And then Greg from FMI is going to join, and we have a series of questions that both of our panelists will be addressing. So please register early, get your seat. I'm expecting this to be very, very popular, and we have a limit to the number of people who can attend live. So get in early.
Yeah, registration link is in the chat as we speak. One more fantastic thank you to our three panelists this week. You made my life easy, like I asked you to, and you did. You had great conversations with each other. I can't thank you enough for spending the time with us and sharing your experiences with everybody who jumped on today's webinar. And thank you to everybody who did join us. And we hope we see you again next week. And please feel free, all our previous webinars are all available on demand as well. Thank you all very much.
Thank
be
you,
safe.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. See y'all.
Good one.